Welcome back, everyone. We'll now start the next session, Fostering Innovations through CSR. I warmly welcome the moderator for the session, Ms. Ruby Thapar, Adjunct Consultant, CSR and Sustainability, the Conference Board. I would now like to invite our esteemed guests, Ms. Aloka Majumdar, Head of Corporate Sustainability for HSBC India, Ms. Nidhi Pundir, Director, HCL Foundation, and will be shortly be joining by Mr. Ashwini Saxena, CEO, JSW Foundation. With this, I now hand over the session to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirti. Everybody, warm welcome. Good evening to this very interesting session on fostering innovations through corporate social responsibility. As I was going through and talking to all the panelists, I realized that we have a very eclectic and very wise panel with us today. And the uniqueness of this panel is they come from very different industries. So we've got somebody from manufacturing, the brick and mortar types, then you have somebody from banking, something which never goes out of fashion, and the IT industry, which has actually been the bane during the pandemic for all of us staying connected. I don't think any of us could have lived without our computers. And they bring very deep learnings and rich experiences, stories, and we'll have some great cross learnings, on innovation from their experiences. Something a lot, I think, for all of us to take home. We have only one male candidate, male panelist. Interestingly, the ratio is tilted, which is very good. I feel empowered, and you should blame it on Access. I think they're living up to their diversity agenda. So it was. I'm sure you can ask them whether it was by design or default. I think the other bit you can notice about the panel is we've got collectively about 100 years. At least 100 years of experience in this panel. So my invitation to everybody who's attending is make the most of it, send them questions, ask them, chat, put it in the mailbox, and somebody from Access will consolidate, and we'll see at what time to bring in those questions. All right. So on that note, let me just set a little context. Thank you, Aloka and Nidhi, for being with us this evening, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with both of you, and including Ashwini as and when he joins us. So, the dictionary definition of innovation is creation, development, and implementation of a new product, process, or service with the aim of improving efficiency, effectiveness, or competitive advantage. And I thought, given that our focus is on innovation in CSR, I've taken the liberty to add the word social to it. So I may use the word innovation in the social sector and social innovation interchangeably, but feel free to stay with what you think is relevant for your industry. And there is a lot of commonality when you use the word innovation in the business sector or in research, and innovation in the social sector, where either using a different approach to the same problem or an unmet need, or we're creating, or I should say, innovating on new products, models, and services to fulfill that need. But what I find very interesting and different in the social context are these additional formations. First is that any innovation in the social sector is led by social impact. And then we talk about optimizing it to a business model. The second bit I see is that all these social innovations are largely collaborations. It's never done in isolation. And I think that speaks to the premise that people know what their problems are and what could possibly be the solutions to it. The third thing that a social innovation or innovation in the social sector does, it generates very responsible solutions. And lastly, that, it also nurtures social relationships. And I think those formations just make this space very unique in that sense. So let me come to my first questions to both of you. This is my definition of social innovation, and this is how I look at it. So, and there are many definitions and many understandings of social innovation, and for every sector, every individual, it's very different. So I'd like to understand from both of you, what does innovation in the social sector mean to you? Is it really a game changer, or is it just another word or funda that we are using? And what would be some of the criteria of innovation that you would look in a social project when you decide to partner or fund it? So, Aloka, shall we go with you first? Nidhi will bring the same question to you again. Yeah, Aloka.
Sure. So thank you, Ruby. And thanks for that introduction. I think you've covered a lot in terms of what innovation means and how how it is interpreted across various sectors as well. Now, when you talk about social innovation, there are two things. I think you actually hit the nail when you talked about solutions. As far as HSBC is concerned, I think what we look at internally when we are talking about innovations, we look at solutions, effective solutions to a problem at the grassroots level. That's something that is simply put is what we will look at innovation. We look at innovation at. Now, the big challenge for us is, innovation typically means that there is always a risk associated with it. And therefore, because, you asked me that, what is the criteria that you look at when you're looking at innovation, I think it's important. Therefore, one is, of course, coming up with a solution, effective solution. Now, I use the word effective. Now, it can be effective or it may not be effective. When it's an innovation, you have to try it out. So it's basically you're trying out a solution. And I think one of the things we definitely look at is how well one is able to articulate the risks associated with when one is talking about a solution, because, we are in the business of risk. We are a financial institution. And that's something that we constantly look at when we are looking at any programs. The other thing I wanted to highlight, we have a very large portfolio of work. And if you see the grassroots programs, actually in some way or the other, they've all been social innovations at one point of time. And the ones which are established today, they are ones which have actually they have proved that they are effective solutions. And therefore, those innovations have now been have become a regular program or a regular intervention model. But most of it, we've seen that most of them have been in some time in innovation. So that's something. But I think I just want to highlight one thing, because you spoke about criteria. I think we are at a stage currently to be where we see that the scope of doing social innovation will be higher. Two things, and there are two things that I want to cover in this. One is, of course, the availability of funds. I think CSR has opened a very large pool of funds available to the sector, and therefore, innovations, social innovations, you can actually invest in social innovation. So that's one. The second is, of course, the pandemic, and I think it gives us huge amount of. It has shown us that it is time. Nothing is static, and it has to be evolving. When we're talking about solutions for the sector at large. So in a very short thing, this is something that I wanted to highlight, and of course I'll hand over to the other panelists now.
I think you brought about some interesting points. I like the fact that, risk, not many people think of risk. And I think given that you're from the banking sector, I think that's a good point. Most of us don't think of risk when we talk about social innovation, or even when we propose an idea. So I really like that point. I think something to take home and think about. And along with the criteria, you also told us how to measure social risk, social innovation. When it gets normalized, then you can talk about the impact about it. Interesting. Thank you for that, Aloka. Nidhi, over to you.
Thanks, Aloka, and thanks, Ruby, for that question. I mean, there are a couple of elements, obviously, when we are looking at social innovation. Often people would tend to think that innovations revolve around science, which is true to some extent. But when we are looking at social innovations, we are talking about ideas, we are talking about energy, we are talking about, various stakeholders coming together. And obviously, social innovations need to be game changer. I mean, there are a lot of issues which we are as a country struggling with, and there are a lot of issues where perhaps we've yet not found solutions. I mean, on one hand, we have enough, if we look at Republic Day parade yesterday, we can be very proud of ourselves, the kind of models that we have today. But on the other side, we also have social issues, be it child marriage or be it, so many issues which are related to poverty. Social innovation as an underlining statement, I would say, must be able to deal with the poverty situation and must be able to provide solution to us not being able to achieve socio-economic indicators. I think that's underlining statement. And that's where we call for more and more innovation, especially when there are provisions through CSR, and when there are provisions that today we have the liberty to actually use some of this fund or most of this fund to be able to incubate such models which provide solution to larger problems, be it nutrition, be it children's issues, be it environmental issues, be it economic issues, livelihood issues. So a very solid or a robust analysis to begin with of the issue that we really want to tackle with an innovation, and a very clear framework of result. That's very important. Because let's understand, this is CSR fund. This is a very different kind of fund which we'll get into. So some level of result orientation is important in a social innovation. While I agree that it needs to be free flowing, it needs to have a lot of flexibility. It also needs to be enough. I would say it needs to have enough motivation for young minds and the talents to come forward and work on a common platform. Not wearing the hat of their own company or institutions that they belong to, but for larger collaborative teams to be able to work together to provide solutions. Social innovations also call for structured partnerships, and the partnerships would obviously begin with the society at large. I mean, they should be seeing society, or let us say communities, as partners in it, because a lot of ideas can actually come from them. They are the ones who are actually going through the problem day in and day out. So how do we really make the whole exercise participatory? That's another very important aspect of social innovation. Without them, nothing for us, without us is the slogan. So how they own the entire social innovation aspect is extremely important. Look at the entire weavers movement, or the farmers cooperative, or the self-help groups, and so many ideas which initially were perhaps they were kind of being seeded across the country, and now they've become the main fabric of how we function. I think the last point I wanted to make on social innovation is the cost effectiveness, because all of us really need to be looking at how best to have CSR rupee measurable, and how exactly do we utilize the funds that we have in the best interest of the issue that we want to, basically best interest of the communities, and how do we really are also able to measure impact, and that will have an implication of the unit cost per se. I fully agree there has to be a risk appetite. There has to be, because when we innovate, we take risks, and that appetite is very, very critical and important. And how do we really keep the teams charged, because they're working towards some level of uncertainty, some level of some things will work, some things will not work also. But despite that, we really need to keep the people who are working at it excited enough, motivated enough, still invest in it, and be ready to cyclically invest and scale it up. So that's critical, because if social innovations are not scaled, they're good for nothing. That's another important aspect. So let me stop there, and then we can come back on the topic. Thanks.
So some interesting points, Nidhi, that, how do you get the community to own the ownership, the innovation, and how do you tie it to poverty? So it's not just social development, but it's socio-economic development, both coming together. And I think those 2 points really stood out for me from what you said. And how do you navigate the uncertainty of associated innovation? Interesting. Okay. So at that point, I'm going to invite Ashwini. Ashwini, we're talking about what is your understanding of social innovation? Do you see it as a game changer? What would be some of the criteria that you would look at?
Thanks, Ruby. Sorry for a little delay, joining up this thing.
You joined us at the right time, yes.
So I think, Lily and Anita have already touched upon one of things which I heard with a lot of interest. I would like to open up another element, social innovation. And I think, and picking up the clue from where Lily, that I think innovations for them to be social innovation, it's important that the community should have some participation. And in fact, that opens up another element that in social innovation, that when we want to talk about it should create a new opportunity of roles and responsibilities to be redefined. It's not necessary that it has to be a linear or a straightforward approach that we take towards any social project. We're very cast and define the roles for private sector, for the academics, or for that matter, the voluntary organizations that we work with. And I think the most important part, the communities themselves. So I think for social innovation, the next frontier, if I may say, or the next challenge that we all have to together decipher and work towards is how social networks can be nurtured, how they can be redefined, how new roles and responsibilities of this emerging new social contract that we are having today in this world can be looked at, so that's where a lot of innovation is possible. So innovation is not, according to me, just about products or services that we can offer to people in a cost-effective manner or in a more technologically oriented manner, but also how we are able to redefine, how we are able to recast the different roles and responsibilities for their inherent inefficiencies to be ironed out. And I think that's the new frontier for social innovation to look at. That's one of the key things that, at least in our work in a small way, we are trying to work upon as to how social innovations can actually lead towards those dimensions.
So interesting. So while we have to, look at what are the risks, while we have to see how they address poverty and uncertainty and how the community owns it, but you also need to create new networks to support this social innovation and redefine the roles, whether it is of the funding agency or of the, innovator themselves and the community. Yeah, so I think solid, interesting. So I think we've got many new dimensions to social innovation here. I mean, that naturally, and Nidhi mentioned about scale, and that takes me to my next question, is that how do you scale and create impact of social innovations? Innovations in the corporate sector have a imperative, there is a reason why they're doing it, and there's funding behind this, there's force behind it. But the innovation in the social sector is really not as simplistic.
I know you were there.
Ashwini, can you mute yourself? Thanks. So, innovations in the social sector really not as linear or as simple as we are talking about it. There is a lot of muscle, thought, dynamics that go behind it, people dynamics, social dynamics, economic dynamics, many other dynamics. So my question is, how do you scale and create impacts of social innovation? And how do you promote the social innovation? To be normalized as a norm in the community for whom it has been created and for others as well. So I think, Nidhi, you spoke about scale. So let me start with you on this question.
Thanks, Ruby. That's a very pertinent question because, again, going back to that, these resources are not the usual resources, obviously, and all are accountable to make them rupee measurable. It is important that social innovations are made when they are really needed. I mean, that's first important. If there are good examples or best practices available, Ashwini made that point about networks, gaining knowledge from various partners who are already working. This is one field where one should not be competitive, one should be collaborative. One should be looking at best practices which have been implemented elsewhere, and if they are replicable enough, bring them in. However, if there is no solution available and we really are facing a challenge, obviously we should be innovating and we should be looking for better solutions, and that's where we really need social innovations. Another aspect of it is we should not wait for a social innovation to happen. It should be rather a culture, it should be rather a practice. Keep innovating on the way, keep kind of keep cultivating ideas, keep nurturing that kind of fertile ground within your team or within the partner networks that one works with. Keep talking to various stakeholders if you have an idea, and keep innovating as we go along the journey. That automatically brings scale, because once you have an ownership, once several people are owning the idea and willing to invest in it, because the investment will not happen only in terms of funds. Investment will first happen in terms of actually several people coming together, brainstorming, owning the idea, giving the blessings or whatever you call it, and most importantly, people giving their skill set to it, because innovations happen with some kind of technical skill set backing it. And that's where I truly honor and respect the entire professionalism in the sector. So many people now opt to study social work or to study the allied subjects, and they start as early as then, about their ideas, and those ideas really need to be watered enough such that they can, and they must have freedom in any organization to kind of take that ahead. Talking about scale, again, I would say that how do you really bring in the trust of the investors or the people who are really holding the budgets, including government? It should not be limited to the CSR space or to the NGO fraternity, because no way with limited 20,000 or whatever crores that we talk about in the CSR overall space, we'll be able to achieve scale for a country which is as big as 1.5 billion. So how are we, right from the beginning in social, innovation space, how are we having our stakeholders on board or government on board? Because eventually the scale will be achieved at that level. And if the innovation does not reach there, I think we've missed a lot in terms of, not investing our resources. We take a very structured approach. We always sign an MOU. We always have, the government department, whichever government department is responsible for that particular subject by our side. Even if it's a non-funding MOU, the roles and responsibilities are quite clear. And once the ownership happens there, you will see that the budget charter is moving. They will take it from a block level to a district level, from district level to a state level, to state to national. But scalability is achieved by, just to kind of sum up, by identifying the right stakeholders right from the beginning, having the right advocacy around it, which means that one is doing constructive advocacy, one is talking about it, one is influencing the right influencers. Third, which I already talked about, community ownership. Very important. I mean, if they are not becoming the ambassadors of what we are doing, as a part of the process, transformation should happen, and they should be talking about the change, which, even environmental programs. I mean, if the local community is not owning the model, then obviously it is bound to fail. And then, of course, having a large panel of network or stakeholders aligned to invest in scale. That's critical and that's important. And that goes back to the point of cost efficiency and optimizing the resources. And that's what I have in terms. Of course, there's several examples which I can quote, which from a very small initiative we have brought to scale, and those are definitely available. And another very critical point is documentation. Documentation should be taken as seriously as actually doing the work. So wrong or right, document it, document each step, because when we start scaling it up, that becomes like your operational manual. That becomes the book to go to. And video documentation, process documentation, steps, how many people did it take? What kind of cost improvisation can we make in taking it to scale? I think those are critical points to kind of scaling up such wonderful innovations that happen.
Nidhi, you got me curious to wonder where does social innovation rest only in the CSR sector? Are only people from those kind of backgrounds really supposed to do social innovation? And when we say social, it encompasses everybody, the entire society. So why is there a struggle to scale it and, to look at it as an opportunity for business? I mean, I'm really, really curious there.
I can quickly respond to that.
Sure.
I see social innovations happening everywhere. I mean, look at such bright officers we have, in government and young league of people out there. We work with them quite closely, and I'm very appreciative of, the kind of ideas they have and the kind of real zeal to bring about transformation they have. CSR, I would say, players, we are a part of the larger system, and when we work together, and that's one big aspect of. So never do a social innovation in like a in situ environment in your organization only. Always right from the beginning have the right stakeholders in it involved. That's what I'm saying, and they're happening all over. I mean, we are actually progressing quite fast as a nation, I would say, and all across. I mean, look at some of the big projects, and I'm sure they are also based on foundations of novelness and innovative ideas.
Let me bring you in here. What do you think of scale and impact, and how have you approached it?
Ruby, I think scale and impact kind of complement each other. Without scale, you don't get impact. Without impact, I mean, you can't talk about impact. And I'll try to bring it up through an example from one of our classes. I think the first most important thing is to maybe redefine the problem statement itself. What is it that we're actually trying to solve as a problem? So that's one part. And the second part is to then take a number of non-linear routes to try achieving that solution, to find the solution for that problem. And at the third stage, if you bring in the right kind of institutions, it can help you scale it up and also bring in the leveraging that you want so that the impact gets. So I would like to break it up into these three simple, I would say, steps. So it's a very interesting project that we are doing as one of our environment projects in a place called Raigad district of Maharashtra. Mangroves is a very important element of the ecosystem there. We have a small port there, and we have a nearby steel plant. We realized that over the years, deterioration of mangroves has taken place. And hence, industrial activity was only going to create more challenges for the sector. So how do we address this? So first thing was very simple, that we need to plant more mangroves. How do you do that? And does it require that you will be putting up an NGO which is going to go and do that plantation on a year basis? And how does that pan out to the community? So we redefined the problem by saying that this is not about mangroves being depleted over the years. It is about the disconnect that has been created with communities, the industry that is coming there, and the marine ecosystem that we have. Somehow, over the years, the community seems to have forgotten that they are an important element, constituent of this ecosystem, and this needs to be restored. And we should not be addressing this issue as if we are trying to, mitigate some of the harm that we may potentially create. But actually, we should be looking at it as a proactive measure by aligning with the community for that. So the problem for us was not about depletion of mangroves. The depletion of mangroves was redefined by us as a problem which required communities' involvement and communities this acceptance that they are a part of this ecosystem. So that becomes a much larger problem to tackle. Because apathy towards your immediate environment is quite common across all settings. So the program got redefined in its basic implementation approaches. Rather than we bringing in an organization to do the plantation for us, we brought in an organization to only help train the local communities to do the plantation. We came up with a model where the plantation would be taken care of by the women self-help groups of the trees. Besides the plantation, they would do the nursery development also themselves. So this was kind of weaved into the livelihood practices of these women, so that they would do the nursery part, they would do the transplantation. And in order for this to sustain, they would also do a number of other things, which are related to their marine livelihoods. This is going to sustain them as a household. And this enhanced interest that yes, this constituent of our ecosystem is important for our own existence. They would be then able to become the champions of mangrove restoration in that sense. And that's how this program started unfolding. And we started off in a small way, some amount of plantation got done, then next tranche, then next tranche. Then we innovated, okay, for example, if we are doing transplantation, the transplantation should not be done using plastic bags. So why not involve jute bag making? So every single element of the activity had some component of livelihood and some awareness towards environment. So working on both the things at the same time. And once a substantial amount of work was done, that was the time when we brought in government's own department and mangrove cell to start working closely with us. And that opened up a whole lot of opportunities, not only in terms of more enhanced plantation of mangroves, but also of creating more livelihood opportunities and alternative livelihoods for these women. So now the whole, the whole equation has changed. That the same set of community which was either questioning the industry players for the deterioration, or the industry players trying to write it off from their shoulders, saying that this is not because of us, this was traditionally happening. The whole role responsibility mechanism has changed. So the community knows that this is a part and parcel. There is a trade-off between industrial activity and the environment that we have. We as one of the players from the industry side know that this is an important role for us to play there. The government has come forward to support it, and this whole scale and impact would not have been visualized if the approach would not have been innovative enough, if I may use the word innovative in this sense, to redefine the problem and look at the solutions from a number of various ways. So I think for social innovation to scale up and for social innovation to become impactful, it would be important to build upon bright ideas in such a sense that the ownership increases, the core competence of the right kind of organization is brought in. And then this becomes a good model which can be replicated or at least multiplied by the government resources. Nidhi is very right in saying that no matter what amount of money may come from CSR or for that matter even other organizations which are into supporting such innovative startups and all that, not just CSR funds, that itself is always going to be remaining insufficient in terms of payments. Another thing which is futuristic, but I would still be happy to share it with the audience here, is that we've also realized that there's a big gap where you have social innovators, startups sitting at a particular level, and then you have a lot of grassroots level organizations who have got accustomed of doing certain things in a certain way, and there is a disconnect. There is a startup, there is a bright idea, innovative idea which needs to be scaled up and to be tested as a proof of concept and then scaled up. And then you have a number of organizations who are, perhaps not aware of those ideas, perhaps have not tested them. So there's a disconnect between these two. And this ecosystem needs to be nurtured. So we've taken it upon ourselves that we are now in the process of finalizing a few, I would say, platforms and a few, I would say, trust funds, I may use that parlance, to see how we can nurture this ecosystem. And that's where the role of corporate sector comes in. That's the role where the CSR organizations come into the picture, because we have the ability to do experiments and not feel bad about failing in something. Unfortunately, we put a lot of emphasis on the government for scaling it up. But the government, with its kind of responsibilities towards the public exchequer and the responsibilities that it has as a public institution, it doesn't have much of a scope for trying experimentation and failing in that. That is, I think, the gap that organizations like us can perhaps fill in. Because in any case, we are small enough to reach out to the kind of scale that is required for a country like India. But we are small enough to try experimentation, to try soiling our fingers at the grassroots level, and be candid enough to say perhaps this has not worked, it has failed. That also is an important lesson. So I think this is the kind of a ecosystem that we are, at least as a foundation, are trying to nurture over a period of time. I'm sure you hear it in the public domain how we are trying to do that. The idea is that we should not just be solving problems, we should be defining ourselves as change makers. So that's why I said in the beginning that the roles and responsibilities need to be relooked and redefined by all of us. And that's the kind of a vision I would say we have. That as a foundation, it's not sufficient enough to just solve some problems here and there. It's important for us to become transformative.
Interesting. I think I like the fact that what you spoke about is redefining the problem. Sometimes we are so attached to the way we have defined the problem that the scope for innovation gets very limited. So when you redefine the problem, there is more engagement, more collaboration. And I'm wondering if while there is collaboration between the startup and the NGO and the implementation partner, would there be scope for collaboration between corporates when projects are successful? And sharing of best practices more actively so that there is scale. That is another way to scale it as well,
Yes,
because bank groups will be a problem not just in your area but in many other areas. So maybe that's something that could also be one indicator or one opportunity to scale.
We've learned ourselves. We've learned. Godrej has done tremendous amount of work on mangrove restoration.
Yeah.
So our teams have talked to each other. We've gone to each other's locations. We've gone to each other's sites. We've learned from each other how certain things have been done. What kind of speeches would work well. I mean, a lot of knowledge sharing has been done. So for sure, I think corporate to corporate collaboration is obviously required. In fact, you're tempting me to give you another example.
I'll invite you in a bit to do that. But it also, I think, a corporate to corporate collaboration also addresses or speaks to Nidhi's point about cost, because then there is more pooling and more cost effectiveness and reach in that sense. So at this point, let me bring the banker in. Aloka, how do you look at this?
I think Nidhi and Ashwini, they've brought out some very, very important points. Most of it is covered. I'll just, in fact, highlight 2 points. One is that if you're wanting impact and scale, you need patience. So that's something I think as a funder's perspective, this is something that how we look at. We look at 2 things. We look at patience because, you mentioned an important point, Ruby, that, when we are doing innovation in a corporate environment, it's very structured in terms of how it's going. And of course, with that, like I mentioned, we know that, if something is not going right, how we do it, etc., how there's course correction. I think when we're dealing with the social sector, the problems at the grassroots are manifold, which we don't know. So we may actually want to solve one problem, but the fact is there are so many problems at the grassroots level. You cannot say that, this is going to work for me, because, you will have a very, very unexpected incident. You will have some unexpected developments which can have a major impact on the target audience that you are working with. So as a result of which, I think from the funder's perspective, patience is important. See, funding is a very, very important element we always see, because that is something that most the social sector people, organizations, they struggle with. And I think both Nidhi and Ashwini made a very, very important point, that of collaboration. And so from our organization's perspective, whenever we are looking at any social sector program, we really look at long term. So most of our partners, we have partners which are, partners for more than a decade. So that's something. It has taken that long for something to be established and scale at a different level. But having said so, I think, and Ashwini made an important point. Ashwini said that community connect, if it's not there in any solution that you're looking at, it's going to break as it is. So therefore, these elements will need to be integrated when one is looking at, putting together a solution or a innovative idea in place. The other thing, when it comes to funding and patience, I think that's where the private-private partnership becomes a very, very relevant tool. Because as corporates, we all have constraints, right? And Nidhi mentioned that, no amount of money is enough for the problems that we are dealing with. But having said so, if there's collaboration with corporates, and that partnership will give a huge amount of, you can say, the ability to do stuff for the organization which is actually working on that socially innovative idea. And that's something which is going to be critical. I think still a long way to go in private-private partnership, but I think all of us, I know for a fact we're unable to share it today, but I know that there is something that we are doing also where JSW will play a very, very important role. And we're working with Ashwini's team on that. But I'm just saying that and that's going to be quite an innovative platform we are hoping. But the only thing I'm highlighting is that we have, as funders, we have to look at 2-3 things which are critical from the elements that both Nidhi and Ashwini pointed out. Over and above that, I'm talking of patience, I'm talking of private-private partnership, and I'm talking of also being, like in the corporate sector, the risk of failure will need to be also accounted for, because we cannot say that, whatever we are doing or whatever we are funding is going to have a great impact. So there has to be, and Nidhi spoke about accountability at various stages. So if you're engaged at various stages, then you know that, when to course correct, what is working and what isn't working. And that's something which is going to be very important if you have to get an idea and scale it to a certain level. So I'll stop here.
So on that note, Aloka, how about sharing with us any example or case study where social innovation worked to leverage the idea, or where social innovation actually, went in the opposite direction and you really didn't meet the social innovation? Any such examples that you could, one example that you could share with us, which stays with you, or there have been immense learnings that came out of you? I mean, given that you spoke about patience, long-term investments, partnerships, accountability, anything that comes,
sure.
and that comes to your mind.
Right. So I'll tell you about, so this actually got me thinking, what should I be sharing? Two things, before I get into a particular case study, Ruby, I think you also asked a question that, is it only CSR which is driving social innovation? I think in India, CSR is it's just a part of this entire social innovation space. A very small part, if you ask me. If you just take the entire digitization space today, and you see the pandemic, we are one of the countries, I think the last mile delivery of aid that's happened during the pandemic, I don't think any other country would have been able to do so. Yeah. I mean, what India has been able to do. So I think that's what you call innovation, where the scale, look at the scale and impact of, large amounts of relief actually reaching to that individual account. And that's something, it's a great example when we say that it's beyond CSR and it can go to this thing. CSR there has played a role on, funding how it can go, but the system, the innovation was in place. Everything was in place, and therefore we could, it was almost a test of that kind of innovation.
Yeah,
so
and
that's
I know, very valid, Aloka, and I always wonder, do we have to say that social innovation, or does it really have a business case? And should business leaders and CEOs be talking about innovations of this kind? And then possibly CSR is then integrated into the larger business strategy of the company as well. So yes, it's always there are question marks, and there are, another day, another topic for discussion. But yes, to you, any case in point.
Right. So I'll in fact just very quickly mention two cases. One is actually we're doing with Access. So since it's an Access platform, I thought that let me just talk about it. We actually created a company called the Pink City Rickshaw Company. And it's something, Access came with this idea of creating in the Pink City of Jaipur, rickshaw company, e-rickshaw company driven by women. So that was a very interesting thing. It was a great idea. We thought, okay, great. Let's have so the objective of the grant was to create the company where the equity participation were from the ladies who will be driving the rickshaws. And of course, a prototype was made with a very, very renowned institution. And then, they were trained and everything was put together with the grant, and then things started working. We didn't realize that there were so many other problems when we just put together the program. There were many issues that we had to think of, issues which related to the women who were driving the rickshaws, the seasonality. So, you can't be earning just for 4 months in a year because of the Pink Cities, and they have tourists only for a very limited amount of time. So you can't tell someone, okay, I'm giving you something, and then you earn for 4 months, and then you can't do anything for the rest of the year. So there were various such examples that happened, but I think, and it has taken us quite a few years. It's almost, I think, 5 years into the program currently, and the program has actually started. It's becoming sustainable is the model. And we realized that you just cannot keep it in one city, and we have to kind of look at it in covering the other cities in Rajasthan for them to make a kind of a movement to make it more attractive and make it also business sense for them. So lots of things in terms of also the infrastructure of charging the e-rickshaws, etc. At every point there were hurdles, and with the solution. But the fact was, the objective was that you create a company. And I think we're still, while it has worked well for us, Rupi, but I think still we need investment again for the next few years for us for it to be absolutely running on its own, it's going to take some more time. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight. And the other innovation we're currently working on is actually on the supply chain piece. I think we are now working a lot on sustainability in supply chain. We're trying to work with farmer producer organization at the grassroots level and linking them directly to the to companies or corporates or industry who are procuring from them. It's a start. So this is something, it's not been easy because you're dealing with several intermediaries. And it's not that intermediaries are not important. Everybody plays a role. So how you define it, where you can actually make ways so that, the larger income comes to the farmer producer organizations is something that we are working on. And also there is a huge movement in the corporate sector at large. If you see, large companies, everybody's talking of sustainable products when they are sustainable raw material. And as a result of which, we see huge amount of scope for innovation in this space, where in terms of, how you make both the product and the supply chain sustainable. So that's something that I thought I just highlight.
Yeah, and that could really change the game for farmers in our country and for the whole food security space in the country.
Right.
Nidhi, any case in points from you, maybe one which you could share with us?
Well, again, social innovations, as I said, that when you're facing like a huge challenge, and obviously they just happen, you will have like a team member come up with an idea and then, you build upon that. And as I said, that it's extremely important that those ideas, and they at times, come from the communities themselves, and how vigilant one is listening to them. So I'll give you maybe one quick example where we were facing this issue. We were working in the communities of Chennai where, we often saw children engaged in crime at a very early age. And while, one would do the regular education programs with them and one would do vocational education, so on and so forth, we often saw that, because they had a very high exposure, given that they lived in such communities which were, difficult communities, so as to say, both mothers and fathers involved in different kinds of activities, children obviously were getting an early exposure, and obviously they didn't understand what they're getting into. And at that stage, we kind of thought that why don't we work with the police here, and they are the ones who must be also worried about the situation. And that's when we discovered that police already had a kind of a plan, but somewhere it was not getting executed, as much as it should have. Of course, they were trying their level best, and there was this whole scheme which Tamil Nadu government had come up with, police, they called it police boys clubs, and we renamed it to police children's clubs eventually. But then we started with something known as night surveillance. We started with something where obviously HCL volunteers were involved, HCL foundation employees were involved, and some of the peer educators got involved, and most importantly, the police got involved. So we started with, something, and which was, again, I would say, led by one of the team members quite beautifully. And then the idea kind of kept on building itself. And at some stage, we were able to then start very formal kind of community-based, these are centers, basically, which are right inside the community with all kinds of facilities and we actually then, after running it, I would say we kept on adding on a lot of stuff to it, sports and computer education and entertainment program. And most of these children actually did not have any place to study. And they came from highly violent families, there was violence all over, and there was no safe place for them to actually study. And these are children in most difficult circumstances. We continued to work for 2-3 years, and at one stage we said, okay, I'll maybe talk to the Chief Police Commissioner and maybe sign a formal MOU where there'll be defined responsibilities for the police and defined responsibilities for us. And that's where I would say police gave us full support, and so much so that surveillance cameras have been put by police. We are providing the education work, and we scaled it up, eventually to more than 27, 28 such centers and communities now, where we actually have children who would have otherwise got into the, that whole cycle of crime, and then obviously different kind of poverty, they are now emerging as national level players. They are now emerging as, talent on science. And it has taken us a decade from the starting point to today where we are. And the beauty of the model is that we were able to talk about the same model here in Uttar Pradesh, and we've been able to very recently sign up a unique initiative called Nanne Parinde with the police, where we are running like a street kind of an education program on a van, where we are able to identify the children who are abandoned or children who are we find them in very difficult situations on street, but how do we really mainstream them? How do we engage them? And this is again, in partnership with government. Essentially, partnerships with other corporates. Of course, there's one platform that I would really want to talk about, which we have incubated in HCL Foundation, is HCL Foundation Academy. And as you spoke about, Ruby, how do we really take the knowledge, the models, the best practices, the lessons learned to the wider community and create a community of practice? I think HCL Foundation Academy, especially this pandemic year, has done a great job. We've been able to hold multifaceted, several consultations, and we've been able to share so much. And that's where we are very fortunate to have so many corporates joining us. And we are even sharing governance practices. We're even sharing how do we replicate, how do we, even if, it's a restriction, so as to say, from the fund flow perspective, at times it becomes difficult for us to kind of put the fund together because one has to really manage books of accounts separately. It has been possible for us in a state where another corporate really wanted to take that practice to be able to share the whole thing and the whole source code. I mean, that's the vision of HCL Foundation, to be the source code for socio-economic development. And we've taken that vision very seriously, and we share the source codes through the HCL Foundation Academy, and we intend to actually do more of it because it's all about multiplication. It's all about, having these models replicate. And there's several examples, I would say, where things started with a very small intention, or let's say passion, of resolving an issue, and then they took a shape of a full-blown project eventually.
Really beautiful. I really liked, a cause-related social innovation example, because largely what I hear is around the economics of it, but beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Nidhi. Ashwini, now I give you 2 minutes to share, which I got you to hold then. So over to you, Ashwini.
I just lost you for the last few seconds. What you said,
I said I'm giving you a few minutes back to share the example you wanted to share then.
Okay. It will be exactly 2 minutes. Redefinition of roles and corporate partners. And it's something that you've been able to do some time back. Water is an important issue across all geographies where we work. In Maharashtra, in the high rainfall areas also, we were given this challenge that we should be supporting the government for desalination of dams. There's a specific scheme which that desalination of whatever these needs to be done. The question that came to our mind.
We are losing you in between. So if you could come closer to the mic.
Is it better?
Yeah, thank you.
So we were given this challenge that we need to support for desalination. The first question, as I again said, redefining the problem. I said, prima facie, why is desalination required? Because siltation has happened. And why has siltation happened? Because something which had to be done upstream has not been done, maybe in a timely manner. What is the data on the basis of which we want to do this desalination? It's 12-year-old data. So with that 12-year-old data, if I have to put in my money to do desalination of dams, it's not a good idea. So what we do is we catch hold of an organization which can do a proper GIS mapping of the whole region. And you can't be planning a watershed without having a regional scale in your mind. So rather than giving funds for a small little area where we were operating, we said let's look at the entire district. Let's make a whole district plan for the entire district. So rather than giving money for deceleration, we actually spent our resources on getting a complete blueprint prepared with the proper data driven approach. With the latest data, simultaneously just 1 week old, to come up with a comprehensive plan and make sure that from the bridge to value concept, whatever needs to be done upstream, downstream, midstream, etc. And we very openly then shared this data with the state government, district administration. And I'm happy to share that at least 5 to 6 corporates who were working in that region, they were very forthcoming to say that, we very humbly put it forward. I said, what we've done is we created a blueprint so that none of us waste our money. So the blueprint is being prepared. It's there. We are offering it to all of you. Whosoever wants to make use of it, you would be still able to solve only a small little problem, or deceleration would be required, but we'll be able to do it only for a few locations here. We've created a blueprint which everybody can follow. And if everybody follows that blueprint, we all fit into the larger picture. So the mosaic, of our work would become a comprehensive and a more holistic picture. And a lot of corporates, I think, who are working in that field, they all came forward, they started picking it up. And in the process, we also learned a lot from them as to how we could think on a certain number. So just, sometimes we can just do a small little thing which can create a opportunity for corporates to collaborate.
It's a win-win solution all the way. That's where social innovation will also scale. Yeah. So that takes me to my next question, and they're in two parts. So one is that we've all read about the iterations in the CSR law this week. And so my question is, does the CSR law aid or hinder social innovation? That's the first part of my question to you. And the second part of my question is that if India was the first country to have a mandate around CSR, do you see India leading the opportunity of social innovation for the world? I mean, just given the diversity that is there in our country in many, many ways. And, so those are the two parts of my question. And let me bring Aloka first on this one.
Sure. So to your first question, that whether it's is it encouraging or it's creating a hindrance as far as the bill is concerned? I think two things. One is that the CSR regulations have made significant funds available. That's something that we have to understand, which can be used for innovation. I think that's one big positive when it comes to the CSR bill. I mean, the very fact that a significant amount of funding is available. And, what we look at is that it is a good thing for using the grants for creating that innovation or creating that solution, which then can be scaled, and at times even can be scaled through other financing methods. So that's something I think has a huge opportunity if you're talking about the opportunities there. I think if you're talking about the challenges, particularly as a financial institution, we think that innovative funding solutions can also come up through this CSR funding, by the way of outcome funding, revolving loans, etc. Now, one has to be very, very careful and assess all aspects of this carefully before you start doing such projects. There is a bit of, I think, a little more clarity would have been helpful if we knew that, say a certain percentage of the CSR grant can be used for something very innovative, because all of us are very cautious because it's compliance. It's a regulatory spending. All of us are very careful that we follow what the Schedule 7 says or what the bill says. But I think a slight scope, if we were given within that entire funding, to try out new ideas a little. There is still scope. I'm not saying the scope is not there, but we really have to go through various discussions and speaking with many people to finally take a call that can it be used for the purpose. So if that clarity comes in, I guess that would be slightly useful for us. But overall, I think it's definitely opened a huge opportunity for trying out new things. Using grants to create solutions is something today is much, much more than we had earlier. And to your next question, Ruby, you're absolutely right. It is definitely, as a country, we are making, because you today you have many case studies from India which are being taken to other countries as well. But, we had seen earlier other models when we are getting it from other countries, but we do see many ideas are being taken today. I'm taking one example. We work with an organization called Mandeshi, and their entire program, and actually, quite a few years back, I remember the US Treasury Secretary visiting. It's about 5-6 years back, and she actually took the model to say, okay, now I'm going to take it there in the US. So I'm just saying that there are examples of that, and there will be many more opportunities in that space, is what we believe.
Yeah, and I think the CSR law can actually facilitate that. How should I say, boosting or fortifying the social innovation space by saying that, use these ones to incubate models, which you can try and test at a small, which all of you talked about, that you can try and test and fail in a small space and then scale it with other ways. And I think to your earlier point on clarity,
I always finance space would be also just one thing. I even say the blended finance, which is being spoken about so much today in the sector. I think, that also will have I think the grants can play a very important role to say that, whether those models are working or not. I think that also, because then it opens up a huge opportunity of financing, because you need various kinds of financing for the sector to actually function.
Yeah,
so and I think there's a big opportunity there.
Yeah, and my invitation is to everybody on this, on this seminar, is that the CSR law is being driven by the government, and I think it is time for the corporates to have a seat at the table and also drive this agenda. And I think that's one space of innovation which nobody has really captured. We're still waiting for the government to make the iterations rather than a movement which is the other way. And I think I would love to see that. And I think that's where India can spearhead this and really make this opportunity meaningful. Yeah, so let me invite Ashwini.
I just come in, Ruby, before you go in, just on this point, I just want to iterate, in our experience, what we've seen is that while it's not clearly mentioned maybe in the law, but when we've tried to do some innovative things and we've reached out to the government, we've received quite positive feedback. And as a result of which, the one that I'm talking about, Ashwini's team, we're working on. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to announce shortly. But when we do that, I mean, we've seen pretty good response from the government. So that's clarity. But I guess a slightly more, if it's right there, we don't have to, it will be much quicker for us to take those decisions.
Yeah, and that's why, can the corporate sector have a more active play in the policy space, is my invitation to everybody. Let me invite Ashwini here, and then we'll maybe to the comments.
Ruby, I think, what CSR mandate has done, I think, is that it has got a certain standard. So not anything and everything under the sun can be really qualified as CSR. I think that's one good thing that has happened because of making it as a compliance. And whether it's maybe or anybody of our CSR fraternity, we all know that there are certain things which will not be any more qualified as a CSR activity. So that, I think, is a big advantage, that because of compliance, it has brought a certain level of standardization. And if you look at it, why we require a standardization and a mandate here in our country, because we always say that many of us were spending more than that stipulated 2%, but not many were not doing that. So by bringing in a level of compliance, it has actually increased the net of CSR expenditure in this country. I think that is something which has happened, I would say, in a positive sense. And therefore, in its first iteration, it had its own limitations, and there was a great emphasis on whether you've been able to spend that 2% or not. And I think then the regulations again, softened a little bit, and they said, okay, you can carry it forward, so on and so forth. So I think the typical any new law that you bring in, any new rules or regulations that you bring in, the initial approach is quite regulatory, and compliance. But I can see very clearly, I'm a diehard optimist in that sense, that this softening of the stances will happen. As the softening of these stances would happen both from the public side as well as from the public regulators' side, the trust deficit that prevails by and large would be kind of answered. When what Aluka and I, our teams are working together with a incidentally a government agency, that trust deficit would go away. That besides the 50%, we actually bring in a lot of good intent, and also a lot of, I would say, at least to some extent, the capacity to think creatively and come back with solutions, etc. So I think, despite what may happen, this is a trend which is going to catch up over a period of time. Within the rules, if you look at it, there are a lot of ambiguities, and I think the latest citation again has only compounded some of those reasons. But I'm sure, with the kind of fraternity that we have, a plethora of chartered accountants and legal experts, I'm sure we've come up with something. It's a hot topic at this moment. So if you ask me, the flexibility or ambiguity, if I may put it the other way, gives you a lot of scope to innovate, and it also deters you not to innovate. It depends upon how you manage it within your internal stakeholders. Because for internal stakeholders, they don't want any flag in terms of non-compliance. I think that's something which is very high on the agenda. Just any board. I can say it openly, and I'm sure Nidhi and Aluka will also not differ from me. So that portion that can be taken care of. Then what happens is that we can immediately move into the space where innovation can be nurtured. And the private sector, the way it is opening up, etc., I think in times to come, this is only going to increase. It's not going to decrease. So I see it in a very positive sense that and also, in our country, as the consumers would become more and more aware, I would say social responsibility would no more remain as a kind of a compliance matter. In times to come, it will pick up its space the way it has happened in Europe. And we would not be required to just comply with a 2% regulation or not. So innovations in our implementation, innovations per se to be nurtured as an ecosystem, I think it's all going to open up. It's a matter of time. That's the way.
Interesting points, Ashwini, on the trust deficit being addressed, and I also like the point what you made about it. With the mandate, CSR has become meaningful. People are looking at doing more meaningful and more focused activities and nurturing innovation. Let me bring Nidhi at this point for her comments.
I think, first of all, I think, this word mandate is a bit of a problem because the development work, and I have spent whatever number of years of my career doing development, I did not come from the corporate space per se. It cannot be done when you have this whole thing of mandate on your head. It should have its rooting, its seeds in passion, in your willingness to bring about real change and transformation. I mean, the current socioeconomic status of the country in certain pockets or with certain strata, if that worries you, or environmental problems really are of concern, one way or the other, such big corporates working on in the country, I mean, they have obviously played a big role in creating so much employment. Already, there is such a huge contribution of corporates in changing the economic landscape. I would say even before the law, they were contributing. Now, what has happened is a structured fund has become available. And what corporates have also done is they've also brought in professionals who know who are basically social development scientists, who understand that you don't, and they also understand the difference between charity and social development work, and the foundation of which obviously lies in innovations. So surely, I think the new announcements on the law, I mean, there's nothing which we did not know is going to happen. I think they were by and large, most of us being listed companies and all, we've already been quite structured on our governance processes, and we have been, I would say, leading the campaign in terms of having, best of governance procedures even at our partner levels, and we have been focusing on institutionalizing the place and corporatizing it. Now, the difference here is that several places I see that, okay, fine, this much fund was spent is seen as a criteria of performance. That is okay, but how that spent was made, what was the process behind it, what is the impact? I mean, the same 1 rupee can be spent, just by putting in some kind of a box or by actually attaching it to a real health insurance or real something which will, bring about change. So that how part is extremely critical. No matter how much fund one is responsible for or how much mandated stuff one has, but how part is critical. Now, how do you really do social innovation within the kind of compliance matrix? Look at COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, it happened. It was innovation, right? I mean, it's not something which happened, but there was a target. There was a huge social pressure, political pressure, economic pressure, and it happened, right? So a lot of those barriers, so as to say, that would have taken a vaccine so long because there are protocols. Same thing needs to happen with. So how do you seed an innovation? You seed an innovation in one financial year at a smaller scale it up in the next financial year or the next financial year, but don't stop them just because, and don't think that we are going to not achieve compliance if we actually risked in something new. That actually is going to kill the whole spirit, and we will be faced as development professionals only with challenging issues. We are not going to be doing the easy stuff. We are here to do the difficult stuff, and for that obviously we need that kind of energy, passion, risk-taking behavior. But take a smaller risk in a given year. Once we are successful, we scale it up in the next year so that we also are compliant in the sense. So I see it as a very, a very dynamic, a very result-oriented, a result-based kind of a framework where, yes, government has their own mandate, but I think the way we have heard from, Ashwini, Aloka, all the corporates, we're all coming up, with real intention to actually, and real intention of nation building, so as to say, and that's happening now. It's becoming so innovative and so, I would say, enjoyable as a space also. I mean, 5 years ago, people were struggling. Today, they're enjoying the programs they're doing. So that's the big shift which has happened, and more engaging, so as to say. So surely, I think it's a great space we are all in.
Yeah, I think we should leave the compliance. What I hear from everybody is, let's leave the compliance to the compliance team and let us focus on innovation. Great points there. So I have a question for anybody who wants to take this. The first one is, are we seeing any innovative government and private sector collaborations which can enable a more localized entrepreneur leadership to bridge the divide between emergency response and long-term recovery? So anybody who would like to take that question?
I mean, I can quickly take that. We just signed up with, one of our partners who's working with a couple of governments on having, a disaster management system. We also work on DRR, very professionally. And in fact, from Assam floods to Kerala to kind of, obviously we treated COVID-19 response also as, obviously it was a disaster, which was announced. So each place, I mean, what we've been able to collaborate with government is with the disaster management cell, I mean, relief commissioner's office, so as to say. And one example I can give you, even during COVID, where we were able to tie up with the relief commissioners' offices in Tamil Nadu and hence help coordinate the entire disaster response during COVID time, was because we were sitting at the center and helping with technology to ensure that there was a systemic inflow of information and very, I would say, without losing any time kind of a response. And it was centrally organized for the entire state. So these are very important departments of government, which we really need to be partnering with whichever state that we are there. And similarly, in Northeast, we are partnering with a couple of states where what we are doing is we are strengthening the relief commissioners or through technology, through having a better surveillance system, information flow system. And then, of course, where needed, the relief materials have to reach, be it medical supplies or be it. So we obviously do that through a very wide on-ground response through partners. But essentially, I mean, I would never advise to get into disaster risk response reduction and rebuilding without government partnership, because duplication of any order should be avoided, and it's important that people who are in real crisis get the right kind of help.
Thank you, Nidhi, for that. And this question is to the panel. So maybe everybody wants to take a go at it. What is the panel's view on corporates coming together for a social challenge fund?
Yes, so I'll take this. Interesting suggestion, of course, in terms of, but today what you see is you have various funds which are actually, if you see the sector today, you will see various funds which are coming up and which are actually funding, social innovations, and it's like a application, it's a nomination process where you put in your nomination, and there's a proper selection process, etc. We have seen that in terms of corporates coming together to create one, there are a few funds where, say, a foundation has come together to create a fund with the multiple partners coming in. So it's not that it's not there in the sector at all, but I think there is scope for more, is what I would say. But if you see, there are quite a few in the sector. So maybe I just can't remember the names, but the fact is there are quite a few where you can actually avail of. If you have an innovative idea, there are opportunities for those to be funded.
Nidhi, Ashwini, anything?
I would just like to add to what Aloka said, that yes, already there are certain examples where corporates have collaborated for these kind of social innovation funds, and I think where the flexibility is something which needs to be addressed, is that as commingling of funds, what Aloka also touched upon, would improve, and there would be greater opportunity for people to park in funds of various natures to sustain such kind of opportunities. I think it'll unfold more opportunities for sure.
Nidhi?
I think it's a good idea, but one would need to get into the nitty-gritties and details, and coming from the grant background, I fully understand that, because eventually we are talking about accountability. So there has to be a very clear, well-defined purpose for any kind of fund that we create. And if yes, we are all like-minded and there is a commitment to it, because eventually how do you run the fund? How do you implement any fund? A lot depends on that. So what kind of monitoring mechanism do we establish? What kind of committee do we for big environmental programs, for saving our rivers, for creating very big forests, or even if we are looking at let's say bigger issues such as malnutrition or the recent high rates of unemployment and so on and so forth. I think obviously several of us may need to come together, or we might just define the purpose and then divide geographies and work. There are several ways of doing it actually, but a detailed chalking out of the plan would be critical before making any kind of commitments.
Thank you. We have one more question. Are there any examples where you may have managed to scale up innovations fostered through your CSR through convergence with government? If anybody would like to take that.
I think all of us gave an example.
Yeah, I think we have plenty. I think rarely do we have programs where there is no government connect. I think the only thing where maybe the skills sector, where we have large investments there, the engagement is slightly lesser, where it's more in terms of working with NSDC and such. But if you're working with water, if you're working with environment, if you're working with disaster, like Nidhi mentioned, there is no way you can work without the government. So government is a very, very key stakeholder when it comes to working in the social sector. And also you have to understand that government also brings in a lot of resources. And there are many programs today which are actually using CSR grants to take that resources out, how that resource can be sourced for the so many such programs are happening across the thing. So I'm not taking one particular example. We do have in HSBC, we had a very, very large 13-year program called HSBC Water Program, And it was a very comprehensive program, which was it was comprehensive. So it had access to water, quality of water, water conservation, and river. And we worked in the most polluted stretch of Ganga, called the Ram Ganga. So and of course the last vertical being wash. So in that entire process, the biggest stakeholder in that entire program was the government. So therefore, and a lot of the learnings, because it was a 13-year program, a lot of the learnings from those actually got also integrated in many of government's documents as well. And at the same time, they played a very, very important role in the rollout of the program as well. So that's something I'll maybe give to Nidhi for any other.
I can add another one. When the Jal Shakti mission was being launched, prior to that, we had been approaching district administration in a district called Gautam Buddh Nagar, popularly known as Noida. We were just looking for ponds and water bodies, and we did a full comprehensive GPS survey, and we had mapped already scientifically that there were 1,700 small and big water bodies in this area. And as all of you know, how much we face pollution issue in NCR, and obviously unless you really make your water bodies good, you can't get rid of pollution issue. I mean, plantation is one part. So we kind of approached the district administration, and we said that why don't we do on foot, mapping, and very kind of them that they did gave us their entire fleet of engineers and patwaris who worked with us, and we trained them, and we did an on-foot assessment, and eventually 1,000 such water bodies entered the revenue book records. And also this whole thing on afforestation, we took a very clear stand right from the beginning that we are not going to do afforestation as an avenue afforestation, or as just maybe on private lands we go about planting. We were like, what about revenue land, what about common land? So we talk about this whole thing of common land, common water, and common air. And that's where we got into formal MOUs with the district administration. It was started as an experiment on a 4-acre land, and today almost 75 or 80 acre land coming under green cover. So so the land comes from government. Obviously, you can't do anything. You can't do any forestation without land. So that's their biggest share, I would say. And similarly on the ponds, today at least we have so many ponds marked and mapped, and they have been kept aside only as water bodies. And as HCL, we are developing close to 55 such water bodies we've already restored, rejuvenated. And that model is now being picked up by government themselves, by several of the other corporates, some NGOs, and we hope one fine day we'll be able to restore all 1,000. Just imagine how the landscape of the district would change if we were able to do that. And such are the projects which actually call for a larger partnership, call for a larger and obviously the sustainability part, where communities own the model and they have their own trust as in financial trust, to be able to maintain all the work which has been done.
Okay, on that note, I'm going to invite everybody for one last comment that you would have. So shall we start with Ashwini? Ashwini, any last comments?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, please.
I would just start by saying that there are a number of challenges, and the problems that we see are plenty, but I would say the solutions are more than that available. Innovation would actually require, again, I would emphasize upon very, very transparently, or perhaps very, I would say, confidently redefining our roles, responsibilities to unlock collaborative opportunities, convergence opportunities. I think that's the biggest innovation that's required, to take use of the bright ideas that are all around. I'll stop at that.
Thanks, Ashwini. Aloka?
I think in terms of the where we see innovation going, I think the future of innovation, of course, it's an evolving process, so it's not going to change. And I think what we've seen, I think particularly the pandemic last year has shown us that you have to constantly evolve for you to be to survive, literally. And therefore, I think innovation will continue. I think the underlying theme in this innovation is, of course, collaboration with the right stakeholders. with grassroots, particularly when it comes to social innovation, I think taking the grassroots or the communities that you're working with as the primary stakeholders in whenever you're creating a solution. I think that's one. And in terms of partnership, collaboration, I think we've been talking for long about public-private partnership. And I think it's now time that we kind of focus on private-private partnership.
Thanks, Aloka. Nidhi?
Well said. I think, again, keep innovating. I mean, it should be an unstoppable process. Keep thinking about solutions, keep thinking how it will happen. Novelness is also very motivating. People get bored by doing same thing again and again also. So if you keep your mission, be mission oriented. I think that's very important. And how do we really bring about change by having a new approach? The other part, I would definitely say remain participatory, make it like a bottom-up kind of a process rather than thinking something about it sitting in the offices. Innovate in the field with people, with communities. Bring in the social science, elements of social science in it, where you do participatory appraisals with the community. That's critical. And I would say that 2-3 things. I mean, have the right kind of stakeholders on your side, have the right kind of team on your side when you choose a team. I mean, they should also believe in doing something new, and they should have that risk-taking endeavor and appetite, and enjoy it. And that's very important, because if you're engaged and involved and passionate about it, I think results do happen. Most of it's success. Failures don't happen. In social innovation, the good part is that 100% failure never happens. It's lesser there, and that can be improvised upon.
Yeah, thank you. So, the language of social innovation has changed. I've heard words like risk, collaboration with right stakeholders, bottom up, evolving, fail fast, teams, accountability, impact, outcome, culture, private to private partnership, fund for incubation, language which was not heard in the social innovation space earlier. But what I heard above all was empathy to, for the cause, for our country, for really bringing about change. And I think we didn't touch upon SDGs, but I think the SDGs have finally provided a common definition or language across social and business, whether it's government, civil society, NGO, companies. And along with that, the realization that we are all serving the same customer at the end of the day. So it's asking us it's calling for a balance now eventually. So social innovation is actually about doing good in a smart way. And on that note, I'm going to thank all of you for a lovely, engaging, candid sharing, and all the participants for engaging with us and for your questions. Thank you. Over to you.
And thank you, ma'am, for that excellent moderation.
On behalf of Access, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to all our panelists, and our special thanks to Ms. Ruby to nudge our panelists to share some exciting and insightful case studies and to conclude the session well under time. With this, we have come to an end of day 1 of Livelihoods India Summit, and we'll reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. for a plenary session titled Empowering Women in Rural India, What We Have Learned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.